Chapter 65, Queen of the Hive, Part 3.
Then, you are still in her grasp?
Twilight sighed.
I'm afraid so. But I'm close. I feel powerful. More like myself from before all of this. I couldn't oppose the Empress when she first arrived, but maybe now? No!
A voice boomed throughout the expanse, the void swirling violently and angrily. Princess Celestia gave a sharp gasp as her vision turned pure white, before feeling herself impact the hard floor of the war room. It took a few moments, but slowly her vision began to blur back into focus. When reality came crashing back into her mind, her hooves scrambled to find purchase, and the Princess of the Sun dragged herself into a standing position. She looked hastily around. Panic descending onto her, she reached out to Twilight with her mind, finding nothing there. No matter how hard she would try, her connection to Twilight Sparkle had been forcibly severed, and it would not be coming back. Taking a few moments to compose herself, Celestia then looked down towards the still sleeping element bearers. Their features were contorted, grimacing in distress as they struggled to free themselves from the Hive Mind's entrapment. Their limbs occasionally twitched as if they were struggling against some unseen bonds. And Celestia was no longer in any position to help them. She wasn't even sure if they'd be able to wake up with their minds unoccupied. All that the princess could do was hope that their combined efforts had been enough, and she resumed her guard over the vulnerable bearers of the elements of harmony.
Please, all of you,
Celestia whispered into thin air.
Return safely.
Twilight Sparkle was alone. The dark void stretched infinitely around her, the soft lights of the Hive Mind's occupants nowhere to be found. Occasionally, she would catch sight of one of her friends, each one of them pushing back against the darkness in an attempt to reach Twilight. The Queen would also spring towards them on each siding, only for them to have vanished upon her arrival. She had to wonder whether the Hive Mind was taunting her, allowing her friends to make headway only to pull them back and shatter her hope once more.
You shall not break me again!
Twilight announced to the darkness, hissing at the Empress who she knew was watching.
I will not go back into those chains! I will depart your Hive Mind, or I will die trying! Dead, but nevertheless free!
She received no response, but her determined gaze did not falter. Her zeal firm, she gave a dismissive snort to the lack of an answer.
Very well then,
she stated.
Perhaps a demonstration is in order.
Her horn lit up a bright lavender, the queen of the equestrian hive rearing up on her back hooves and slamming them down onto the nothingness. Light erupted. The void below began to solidify and sprout brilliantly green blades of grass. The void above was washed with blue, little puffs of white cloud moving to fill out the expanse of the sky. A single tree grew a short distance away, the vast field stretching on for as far as the eye could see. The sun was warm, and a family of birds chirped away in one of the tree branches. It was enough to bring a gentler smile to Twilight Sparkle's face, and further strengthen her resolve.
Now that I'm freed of your chains, and my resolve soaring to new heights, my influence grows by the minute,
she announced to the sky.
Is this how my ancestor felt? Feeling your grip come undone? And for it to have gone unnoticed by you. I suppose we're all sloppy when we're young.
A single black cloud then appeared in the sky, Twilight's eyes immediately being drawn towards it. Thunder echoed throughout the void, angry and vengeful, and it was getting closer. A single bolt of lightning shot out at shocking speeds, the cloud being vaporized as the bolt struck the grass a short distance away. The electricity sparkled and sputtered, vanishing from view. It did, however, leave a hatefully glaring changeling within its wake.
Ah, there you are.
Twilight said to Immortalis, turning to face her directly.
First and foremost, what did you do with my friends and mother?
Immortalis snarled.
This isn't about those little ponies. You risk undoing everything I have strived for. That is the idea, yes.
Twilight smirked.
You still have not learned a thing, and continue to defy natural order, despite what our race has accomplished in so little time.
Immortalis shouted out.
Canterlot crumbles as we speak. Imagine what we could have in another 10 years. What you could have, you mean?
Twilight spat in response.
Natural order is the way day turns to night and back again. Life and death operating in tandem. Even something as simple as a flower growing in a field, allowing a bee to get its pollen.
She snorted, looking at the Empress in contempt.
You're just on a power trip. A little girl trying to please her mother even after she's gone.
Immortalis' eyes hardened, her pupils dilating as they homed in on the opposing changeling queen. Her horn charged, and without another word, a single beam of magic erupted and devastated the landscape between her and Twilight, seeking to destroy the changeling queen for good. The landscape shattered, and Twilight dropped. Her wings unfurled as she dived down upon the pristine city of Canterlot, albeit lacking its ponies. The Empress's attack continued on above her, meeting only open sky before the flow of magic was cut off. Rage only increasing, the Empress opened her own gossamer wings and quickly moved to give chase. She followed as Twilight rounded a few mansions and headed directly for the castle, the Empress firing balls of magical fire after the rebellious changeling queen all the way. Twilight ducked and weaved through the spires of the castle, the magical fire hitting and crashing into several tower walls. She quickly altered course and charged through one of the towers as it began to collapse from Immortalis' strikes, forcing the Empress to momentarily stop her pursuit in order to bypass the flying rubble. Only for Twilight to emerge through the dust, a lavender aura surrounding her own body and propelling herself into the Empress at full speed. They hurtled towards the ground, moving at back-breaking speeds. But as they reached the gravel below, a green portal erupted to meet them and sent both royals spiraling back out into the sky, dislodging them from one another. They both spun, horns charged, and each released their spells at the same time. They danced and weaved around one another, each attempting to be the first to have their spells hit their target. One maneuver allowed Immortalis to get in close, where she went for a sharp buck. Twilight raised her shield in time to block the attack, the Empress instead kicking off of the barrier and continuing her barrage. Twilight held her shield up a few moments longer, before sending the gathered energy shooting out and causing Immortalis to flinch. Using this moment, Twilight rapidly followed up with a stream of raw destruction magic sent directly at Immortalis. She ducked, continuing to dodge as the beam trailed after her. Only after the beam disengaged did she reposition herself and respond with a stream of her own magic. Twilight replied with a second attack, their mana streams colliding and fusing directly between them in a magic lock. They pressed forward, struggling to overcome the other. The sparks were so bright and furious that they would have blinded any onlookers, but it was just them above the Hive Mind's representation of the equestrian capital. Immortalis' grimace became a smirk, and her eyes lit up with a bright green, with dark magical trails leaking from her eyes. Twilight's eyes, in turn, only widened as dark tendrils shot out from the side of Immortalis' beam and began to spiral down Twilight's own stream of magic. In a panic, Twilight let her magic fade as she bolted backwards, avoiding the tendrils but unable to prevent the main strike from just clipping her and sending her spiraling out of control directly into one of the branches of the Golden Oak's library. The branch snapped and crumbled, Twilight landing in a smoldering heap behind the tree. She groaned, slowly lifting herself to her hooves and examining the area as Ponyville finished forming and replacing the visage of Canterlot. Much like the capital, this town was in pristine condition and showed no signs of warfare, unlike the actual town in the real world. Hooves touched down a little way behind her, a red bolt of magic shooting out towards her. Twilight quickly turned, batting the bolt away and into a nearby building. Wait. Red magic. Twilight's eyes widened as Queen Crysalis smirked at her, her horn once more lighting up and sending a flurry of strikes towards her. She darted to one side and between two buildings, ears painfully burning at a familiar laugh that echoed all around her.
Disguises don't change our magical aura!
Twilight protested, the scientific part of her brain in a huff.
My hive mind, my rules,
Crysalis jeered, tearing one of the buildings from its foundations and forcing Twilight to find new cover.
But this form is suitable, is it not? Crysalis and Ponyville, where the Queen of the Hive was born, and of course where she shall now die. Take any form you want, Immortalis!
Twilight shouted, quickly firing a few retaliatory bolts of magic before moving behind a different structure.
It doesn't change a thing!
Oh, but it does. The voice of Serpent sneered from Crysalis' muzzle. It hurts you, which makes it oh so worth it. Twilight grimaced, the scar on her front itching horribly at the sound of that long-dead changeling.
Maybe it does, but I'm not dead yet! Easily rectified,
Crysalis stated before uprooting Twilight's cover once more and sending the debris down upon her. She opened a portal beneath herself, creating the exit facing the folk Crysalis before simply vanishing in a flash of purple. Crysalis grunted in irritation as some of the rubble came through the portal and showered down onto the Crimson Mane Changeling Queen, scratching her chitin as she instinctively lifted a foreleg to protect herself. Meanwhile, Twilight's teleport brought her out just behind Crysalis, where she ignited a lavender blade and struck it forwards. Crysalis sidestepped, though received a nasty gash along her side. The wound bled heavily, as real as any wound on the outside, and Crysalis snarled as a red spear shimmered into existence. The tip was aimed for Twilight's throat, but a swing of her blade knocked it to the side. However, the shaft of the spear instead hit Twilight harshly on the nose and knocked the changeling aside. Blood ran down her muzzle, stinging terribly as the spear came around for another pass. Twilight's blade vanished as she rolled to the side, the spear embedding itself in the ground next to her. She kicked out, taking Crysalis' hooves out from under her where she landed and hit her head on the way down. The spear disintegrated, Twilight kicking up and lunging onto the other changeling queen with her fangs snapping.
You would tear out the throat of your own mother?
Chrysalis taunted, tutting in disapproval. Twilight stopped, eyes widening as her heart seemed to stop in her chest. This momentary hesitation cost her the advantage, and Chrysalis swiftly kicked Twilight off of her and back onto the hard floor. The floor of the Badlands Hive.
You do not deserve that face!
Twilight shouted in anger, jumping to her hooves as her blade reignited. Her sword swung forth, but was met by Chrysalis' own as it rematerialized. As Twilight pushed, Chrysalis pushed back. Even as Twilight formed a second magical weapon, Chrysalis did the same and locked that one into place as well. All the while, the statue of Queen Avia watched them silently.
I am still in control, Twilight Sparkle,
Chrysalis stated factually, batting Twilight's blades aside and casually throwing her across the atrium.
That fact has never changed. You don't make the rules here. I hurt you when I was weak. I cut you,
Twilight growled, regaining her footing.
I can do more now. Foolish child,
Chrysalis dismissed. Queen Chrysalis' aura wrapped around the statue, its base cracking and Avia becoming free. The stone changeling queen toppled towards Twilight, who fired a bolt of magic into it and was instead hit with dozens of smaller pieces of stone. She then, however, took the rubble in her own magic and used them as targeted projectiles towards the disguised Empress of the Changelings. The first impact made a sizable dent in her chitin, the second hitting the already deep cut along her barrel. Snarling, Chrysalis then raised a green shield and backed out of the atrium through the main entrance. Discarding the other pieces of rubble, Twilight made to pursue the changeling who was most certainly not her mother and passed through the same doorway. Emerging into a vast throne room, banners with a familiar starburst cutie mark decorated the walls. An even more familiar sight sat on the throne ahead of her, casting a smug-looking smirk at the changeling queen with the twitching eye.
Is this preferable?
The other Twilight Sparkle taunted.
Fighting yourself, I mean. You do that just by opposing me. You fight your very nature as a changeling queen. I disagree,
Twilight shot back, trotting halfway up to the throne, horn charging once again.
You're in my seat.
The other Twilight smirk only widened as she arose from the throne, teleporting aside when a large lavender fireball shot at her and instead destroyed the lavish chair. Immortalis, still in Twilight's form, reappeared behind her opponent. Twilight spun around to face the Empress, both their horns charging with intense lavender light before unleashing their power towards the other. They met, once more entering into a magic lock. Only this time, sweat began to appear on the real Twilight's brow as her double continued to carry her smirk. The false Twilight took one step forwards, and then another, and another. Step by step, she was closing the distance between herself and the one who would oppose her. And as she did, her magic also crept towards Twilight Sparkle in its quest to end her life. Her eyes started to take on a dark magical glow, dark forces bolstering her strength as she gave her entire soul into destroying the changeling queen struggling to gain any ground. Twilight fell back onto her haunches, a little bit of fear creeping into her expression as Immortalis closed the gap, and their horns came within inches of each other. Immortalis stood over her, eyes hungry and victorious. Their magic streams continued despite the close proximity, covering both in blinding flashes of lavender light. But whatever trail there was came from Immortalis's. Twilight's magic pushed all the way back to her horn, and but a moment away from failing outright.
The Queen of the Hive,
Immortalis, in Twilight's own voice, whispered in amusement.
Magical prodigy, maybe, but no match for the goddess of all changelings. Your magic fails you, and you have no power here. Don't listen to her, Twilight!
A coarse voice loyally shouted from a million miles away, and yet the presence felt like it was directly next to her.
We're right here!
Right beside you, Sugar Cube,
a southern accented voice agreed.
And that's the honest truth of it.
There was a gleeful laugh.
Together forever! We'd never leave you,
one said kindly. An unseen hoof rested on Twilight's shoulder, generously lending its support.
So don't despair. We're with you, dear.
Despite the glowing cracks spreading down her horn, Twilight simply closed her eyes and smiled. Even if she was to die, right then, right there, opposing the Empress, she was at peace with that. Her friends, fighting through the barriers of the Hive Mind, were at her side. And right there, right then, there was no place she would rather be. There was a flash and a scream. Gone was the throne room of the equestrian hive, replaced by a gently glowing cave. Immortalis had her facade stripped away in a flurry of involuntary green flames. Twilight stood at her full height, her horn regaining power as Immortalis stared at the changeling queen and the majestic crystalline tree behind her. And then Twilight fired. The entirety of their falsified surroundings shattered as if a hoof struck a mirror, fragments of afterimages falling through the air like snow before evaporating into nothingness. Around them was the void of the changeling hive mind, the motes of light symbolizing each individual under the Empress's thrall dancing around them in anticipation. But the moment her magic had made its contact with Immortalis, what was left of her connection to the hive mind fell away. There were no voices, just complete silence. The Empress slowly got back onto her hooves, staring poisoned daggers at the regal changeling queen that met her gaze without flinching and with no hesitation. Twilight Sparkle was free.
I hope you're enjoying the silence,
the Empress taunted, regaining her composure.
Is this the part where you depart from this place? lead your ponies in glorious battle? I don't need you. I still have thousands at my disposal, and each other changeling queen is still loyal to me. They're not loyal. They're slaves,
Twilight corrected the Empress.
and I won't leave them like that. I'm not leaving here until they too can be free of you. A foolish sentiment.
The Empress dismissed.
You are no longer a part of my hive mind, just like Queen Crepuscule broke free so long ago. You cling to this realm just barely, slipping away back into your own lonely mind. You cannot affect what happens here.
Immortalis laughed, relishing what she thought to be a victory despite losing Twilight's forced cooperation. She thought it futile and damning for the younger changeling queen.
Run along now, my little changeling,
Immortalis said with a snort.
We shall be along soon, and you will die with that city.
Nope, said Applejack as she trotted up alongside Twilight, adjusting her beloved hat confidently.
I don't reckon she will.
Immortalis blinked.
What? You... Infection! I contained you!
Oh, please!
Rainbow dismissed upon her arrival.
You can't keep this group of ponies down.
Twilight needed our help. We couldn't sit by and do nothing.
Fluttershy agreed, looking up at the changeling queen with a bright, happy smile.
Oh, everything is so glowy in here.
Pinkie Pie said with a bounce and a squee.
All the lights are so shiny. It'd be a shame if a bossy pants like you got to hog them all.
Quite right, darling,
Rarity agreed, brushing aside her immaculate mane.
These poor dears certainly deserve better than this. A ruffian like you doesn't deserve them.
Immortalis was, unbelievably, rendered completely speechless. She just looked questioningly at Twilight, her eyes wide.
They came in after me.
Twilight said happily.
They came here to save me. They and Celestia both. They gave me the strength I needed to break free of you, and you can't stop our reunion. And now together we have the strength to free this world from you.
The 6 mares slowly became translucent, and within each of them a glowing gem in the form of their cutie marks began to steadily spin in place, their power building. Then they began to rise in the air, dwarfing a terrified Immortalis.
No!
Immortalis screamed, firing a beam of putrid green magic at them. It had no effect.
Not them! Anything but them! I am sorry, Immortalis. So very, very sorry.
Twilight apologized, thinking on the small nymph of 4,000 years ago.
But your mother turned you into a monster, and you have made me do this. You know what has to happen now. You cannot do this!
Immortalis objected quite adamantly.
I am natural order incarnate! I am the Hive! This is wrong!
Lines of magic shot out between the elements of harmony, connecting them together as all of that magic focused into Twilight's horn. And then, before Immortalis's very eyes, Twilight began to change. Her chitin began to shift, black becoming lavender. The holes in her hooves and gossamer wings sealed up, the latter buzzing joyfully at the repair. Her horn straightened out, coming to resemble that of an alicorn's, albeit with a slight curve. The slits that were her pupils widened out, becoming round and soft. Her mane became a familiar blue and pink, and it was then that she truly became the best of both worlds.
You are never natural order, Immortalis.
Twilight said truthfully and sympathetically.
But a perversion of it. The dark magic festering inside of you, and your own faltering, flawed beliefs to the contrary. You know nothing!
Immortalis insisted, firing several more bolts of magic and increasing amounts of desperation.
This is my hive mind!
I cannot be defeated here! I shall not!
She tried to draw on the strength of all the souls around her, but found it impossible to make a connection. She felt their presence within her mind fade away, until she was left completely alone.
They're free of you. A gift to them, from my friends and I.
Twilight stated with finality.
For I have a weapon I've neglected for too long since the death of my mother. Sharper than any blade, and sturdier than any shield.
The 5 mares around her looked at the queen with bright smiles, awaiting the line their friend always did love saying.
The magic of friendship.
The power in Twilight's horn reached its peak, and she fired. Immortalis didn't and couldn't make a sound as the rainbow-colored light struck her head-on. Her form completely vaporized, the elements sending her soul shooting off into the ever-after, free of the dark magic that had corrupted her for her entire life. And then the light shot out into the void, making contact with all the souls that had previously been tied to Immortalis' power. In the waking world, all the changelings stopped their tracks as a powerful magic glow enveloped their bodies. When it subsided, gone was the classical form of the changeling race. Their chitin coloration was as varied as the ponies, as were the colorations of their bright orb-like eyes. The holes in their bodies were gone, their gossamer wings buzzing on their backs in a completely undamaged state. The same occurred for the changeling queens, each taking on their own unique colorations that most suited them. Their horns no longer crooked, and their minds once again their own. Almost automatically, voices then began to appear in their minds. The minds of each of their surviving subjects, all returning to the hive minds that had been before the Empress. The elements of harmony had touched and changed each and every single changeling who had been connected to the hive. Change being in the very nature of those beings where necessary. The only ones untouched by their power were those few who escaped ever connecting to the Empress's hive mind, those like Facade, who watched on with fascination at the turn of events. Facade himself, seeing that the battle was over, quickly departed from his allies and bolted for the throne room. Shining Armor saw him leave and, alongside the 2 captains and 1 dragon, the Prince of the Crystal Empire quickly followed on. Within that throne room, Queen Twilight Sparkle began to stir. With a groan, she opened her weary eyes and took stock of her surroundings. A short distance from her, Cardus and his family were slowly awakened and getting to their hooves. They had all undergone the change, the holes in their bodies sealing up. However, while Panacea's overall color scheme took on a lighter blue coloration, Cardus and Juventus seemed to have retained the original black chitin color with blue eyes. It made sense. Why couldn't changelings still have that color scheme alongside all the others?
Queen Twilight!
A voice shouted out, hooves scampering across the floor towards her.
Are you all right, Your Majesty?
Twilight saw a hole-ridden hoof outstretched towards her, her eyes trailing up it until she met the gaze of an unchanged changeling in the armor of Queen Draco's guard.
I think so.
Twilight confirmed, accepting the help up.
You're not changed. You were never connected to Immortalis?
He shook his head.
I got lucky, I guess. My name is Facade. I'm a friend of Cardus's.
He explained. Once Twilight was steady on her hooves, and he was certain she wasn't going to keel over, he stood back and examined Twilight's new form in awe.
Wow,
he muttered under his breath at a volume most wouldn't catch.
And here I thought you couldn't get any more beautiful.
Twilight's eyes widened, her ears having caught that statement.
What?
Facade's eyes widened just as Shining Armor and the others ran into the throne room.
I should check on something and stuff,
he said in embarrassment.
Yes, okay, see you later.
Twilight watched Facade walk away, a flushed look of bewilderment on her face.
Shining?
Twilight asked her approaching brother.
Who was that?
He laughed, one that was half relieved at his sister's safety and half amused by the situation that had arisen.
A friend. You should get to know him.
Right.
Twilight muttered, her mind flatlining. Luckily for her, it rebooted when 5 familiar shapes also ran into the room in search of their friend.
Twilight!
They all shouted at once, tackling into the Changeling Queen and knocking her to the ground in the ultimate glomp.
Hey, girls.
Twilight muttered, gasping for breath. Don't forget about me, Twilight! A rather eager and not so small dragon remarked as he added his weight to the suffocating pile of hugs. Through the windows, those inside the throne room could see the shield around Kennerlot slowly collapse as Princess Cadence released her hold on it. Most of the changelings outside were in the process of departing, though some flooded down to the city in apparent confusion.
So,
It's over? Vladimir questioned, a flood of relief washing over him as he stretched out his twisted metallic wing to ease the aching muscles at its base.
I believe so.
Broadsword confirmed.
The plan worked.
I like it when our plans don't explode in our faces, Vladimir remarked before turning to see that Shining Armor had apparently also joined in on the cuddle pile against his sister.
all's well that ends well.
The two captains just watched on with small, amused smiles at the reunion occurring before their eyes. Cardus limped over to stand beside them, his family at his side. All were simply relieved that it was done. Relief that family and friends would reunite and that life for ponies and changelings alike could begin to return the journey to normality. The nightmare that had started so many years ago with a single dark magic ritual that was continued by the unknowingly influenced Queen Crudalis, and which culminated in the return of the Empress herself, was finally over.